Hello, welcome to the Ghosts of Harrenhal. My name's Simon.
And I'm Mackelly.
Thank you for joining us for episode 62 of our chapter-by-chapter book review of A Song of Ice and Fire by George Martin. Today we'll be discussing chapter 61 of A Game of Thrones, that's Dany 7.
As always, we're going to chat about the chapter and try not to spoil any future plot points for you. And hopefully we're going to provide you with some entertainment along the way.
We'll summarise what's happened, discuss our thoughts on it, provide some useful background, compare it to the television show, indulge in a little pedantry, and cover some reader mail. Be sure to check out the show notes. Oh, by the way, my sister said she might start listening.
Oh.
And she said, do I need to read the book? I said, you don't have to read the book, but if you don't read the book, you should read the show notes. It will help you if you're not reading along. So
exactly.
That's why you should read the show notes. How are you, sir?
I'm all right. That reminds me, my sister-in-law said a similar thing. She said, I want to listen to your podcast, but I haven't watched the TV show first. And I was like, well, we don't do our show based on the TV show, so you don't have to read the TV show or watch the TV show at all.
Yeah.
So
I think my sister has watched the TV show, so she'll get what's happening. You know, yes. She won't have to rely as heavily on the show notes as your sister-in-law.
Right. So
I have two toilet stories for you.
Yes, you mentioned this yesterday, and I've been very
two
curious.
Toilet stories, not one but two. So
you
the first one,
a great GIF to describe your stories.
Oh, you liked that GIF, didn't you? Yeah. They're just there in Teams. You just go into Teams into the GIF thing, and I just typed toilet, and that was the first one that came up. I was like, good enough for me. So the first one is just like coronavirus madness and how stupid the world is. So Carson, my wife, as you know, is a TA in a pre-K class, so 4-year-olds. And she's been going into work now for like 4 or 5 weeks. She goes every day, and she sits in an empty classroom with 2 other teachers.
Yep. And
they do video classes. Already stupid. If you're going to do video classes with the kids, why not just do that from home instead of spreading the disease? But anyway, okay. So they wear masks all the time and they're careful, but there's 3 of them in this classroom. It's not very big. But when they go online with the kids, they take their masks off, and the rules are they can't be in the same room. And so there's 2 rooms, and so the TA and the teacher go in those 2 rooms. And Carson goes to the bathroom and does her video conference from the toilet. She sits on the toilet for health reasons.
For health reasons, she does her work from the bathroom. What happens if one of the kids needs to use
Well, there aren't any kids there. There aren't any kids. It's just the teachers.
What?
Don't get me started on how daft this is.
They go into the classroom to record.
Not to record, to do live classes, but they have to be in different rooms to do the live classes.
But where are the kids?
They are at home.
So they go into the classroom and do live video, but there's no kids present. So
correct.
Couldn't Carson just do her video call from where you're sitting right now?
Which is not a toilet.
Right. You are not sitting. As best I can tell, you are not sitting on a toilet.
So it's just crazy. I'm like, what? Why are they dragging you into the... I mean, they're dragging you from an environment which is secluded and safe and perfectly amenable to video conferencing with children.
Yep. To
having to sit on a toilet because there's no room for you to do this.
I still don't get why she has to sit in the bathroom part.
Because they have to take their masks off to do the video conference.
And so the teachers can't be in the same room together.
And they're not allowed to be in the same room. So they have 2 rooms. And the only thing they...
Are the rooms that small that the teachers would be less than 6 feet apart?
I think they're not supposed to have their masks off even more than 6 feet apart.
I was just thinking maybe she could do it from one side of the room, the other one could do it from the other side of the room. You don't need that much space to do a video call. Anyway,
the other thing when the kids come back, they're going to do nap time.
Yeah.
And I've been doing like optimization algorithms for how to lay 15 children down on the floor of this classroom so that none of their faces are within 6 feet of each other.
I saw the schematic in our on our Google Drive there.
So
it's good that you have so many degrees in mathematics. I'm sure it's come in handy.
That did come in handy for that one, yeah. Alright, let's get down to business. Quick recap of what Dany was up to last time we saw her. Last we saw Daenerys Targaryen, she was narrowly avoiding quaffing poisoned wine. The near miss had convinced her husband Khal Drogo that they should cross the narrow sea and take back Westeros. The khalasar was headed west from Vaes Dothrak. Why don't we give them the summary?
Okay. Well, Dany surveys the scene of carnage. The khalasar has come across Khal Ogo and his riders laying waste to a town of Lhazareen shepherds. No longer in Vaes Dothrak and bound to the internecine peace, Drogo attacked, destroying the town, killing Ogo, his son, and many of his men. It's a big win for Drogo, generating as many as 10,000 new slaves. Such a bounty could easily fund the excursion to Westeros.
Ser Jorah advises Dany that they head south to Meereen, where they'll secure better prices for the slaves. Dany is not thrilled by the scenes of rape and pillage that unfold, and has Ser Jorah and her bodyguards, very much against their wishes and advice, rescue several female slaves from their tormentors. More blood is shed.
They find Khal Drogo sporting a couple of nasty but not life-threatening wounds, an arrow through his bicep and a gash across his chest. He's pleased to see Dany, but Maego arrives with a stream of angry words to Drogo, obviously about Dany, although her Dothraki was not good enough to catch it all. Drogo is puzzled and asks Dany what she's up to.
Dany says that she thinks these slaves should be made wives of the warriors. Quotho snorts that horses don't marry sheep. Dany retorts that dragons eat both horses and sheep. Drogo is delighted. He feels her spikiness is because she carries his fabled son. He tells Maego to go find a different lamb to mount.
Drogo reaches for Dany, but winces in pain. She calls for a healer, but he has sent them all to tend to his wounded warriors first. One of the women Dany has rescued volunteers to help. Her name is Mirri Maz Duur, and she was a priestess and healer. She tells her backstory and has traveled far and learned much, from a Westerosi maester named Marwyn to others from as far away as Ashae and the Jogos Nai.
The Dothraki are sceptical of allowing her to help, but Jorah tells Dany the maesters know a lot about healing. Dany decides to trust the woman. They take Drogo to the temple where Mirri's medicines are kept. She removes the arrow, stitches him up, applies antiseptic and bandages him. It all looks good. Dany asks if Mirri Maz Duur, who's also a midwife, will help her when the baby comes. Quotho is not so convinced and tells Mirri Maz Duur that Drogo better be fine or she's for the high jump.
Is that a British term for the high jump?
I guess it is. When I wrote it, I thought, I wonder if Mackelly will react to for the high jump. Yes.
I did not know. I took a guess and it meant she's in big trouble.
She's in big trouble, exactly, yeah. I mean, I think usually it means sort of like you get fired, so get fired or perhaps.
Oh, okay. I did not know that. I was a high jumper in high school, so you'd think maybe I was familiar with such terms. But no.
What could you high jump?
My best? 6 feet 2 inches was what I did.
Wow, that's impressive. I struggled to reach a bar 6 foot 2 inches with my hand. I too could jump onto a mat with a bar 6 foot 2 off the ground, but I would go under, not over.
That could be a competition too. You'll keep lowering the bar to see if you could slide through, like a mail slot.
Yeah. So, yeah. I mean, not a lot happens here. I mean,
no, not really.
Dany is clearly. I mean, she's been turning Dothraki since the first Dany chapter, basically. But there are some things that the Dothraki do that she can't really stomach because she isn't.
Yes. Yeah. No matter how much she tries, it's just not in her to deal with some of these murder and rape type situations.
Jorah comments that she's just like her brother, and Dany and pretty much anyone reading the chapter would have had a moment of, what? She's nothing like him. What are you talking about? But it dawns on us and is explained to Dany that he's talking about Rhaegar, which it's an interesting point because just last chapter, we were hearing from Maester Aemon,
Right.
and we were conjecturing that Maester Aemon was talking about somebody bringing shame on the family, and that it might be Rhaegar that he was talking about.
Yeah. And it's also a very conflicting view to the one that Robert shared with Ned in the second Ned chapter, when he said, how many hundreds of times did Rhaegar rape Lyanna after he abducted her? So her stopping a rape, in Robert's mind, would be very un-Rhaegar-like if he was raping Lyanna hundreds of times after he abducted her. Of course, Rhaegar and Robert's not exactly bosom buddies, so...
Yes. It's hard to imagine Rhaegar getting a very fair hearing from Robert.
Exactly.
But, go on.
I was just going to say, I find it surprising that Jorah seems to see Rhaegar in such high regard. Because Jorah's from the north, and he fought on the side of Robert's rebellion, but yet he seems to speak rather highly of Rhaegar. He told Lyanna Rhaegar was the last dragon. Right here, it seems to be paying her a compliment, saying you have like a tender heart like your brother Rhaegar.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think obviously we've heard before that the small folk really loved Rhaegar.
Yeah.
And that obviously he did have some, by Targaryen standards, some very good qualities.
Right.
There is another slightly more negative interpretation, which is, if you think about what Rhaegar did at the tourney of Harrenhal, where he gave the roses to Lyanna Stark instead of to his own wife, who was sitting right there, there is the sort of this is someone who makes decisions based on their gut, their heart.
Oh, yeah.
And doesn't apply. Yeah. So maybe not calculating enough. Right. I don't think he meant that. I think he meant it entirely as a compliment. But if they are similar, then that might be a character flaw that Dany shows at some point.
Right. Kind of wears her emotions on her sleeve and lets her emotions rule her decision making. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So, Dany's making strides at, I think a lot of the Dothraki have begun to like and respect her, but taking from the warriors that which they'd earned in the fight is not going to go very well. Not going to win her friends and influence.
No, it's not. She's very... Luckily, Khal Drogo seems to be very fond of her and puts up with this kind of thing, because she could have gotten in some big trouble. Even she was worried that maybe she had crossed the line at one point.
Yeah.
He seems to be quite fond of her.
Yeah.
Now, he killed 2 Khals in this particular fight, and the 2 Khals are Khal Ogo, and after he died, his Kalaka, which is his son and his likely heir, Khal Fogo. Fogo became a Khal after Ogo died. And back in the previous chapter, when they were in Vaes Dothrak, the one where she had to eat the horse heart, and then Viserys got his crown from Drogo, it was Khal Ogo and his son Fogo that sat with Drogo at the high table of honor. So this is quite a departure from those times of getting along and being brotherly, I guess.
Yes. The peaceful bonhomie of Vaes Dothrak does not stretch very far. So one thing we didn't really mention in the summary was this: Drogo's khalasar actually came across Ogo's khalasar attacking this town. Yeah. And basically they rode in and destroyed Ogo's khalasar, and then continued the job of destroying the town.
Finished what Ogo started.
Yeah.
Yeah, and one of the things Dany sees, she says, she's talking about all the various things that are dead as she's riding into the town. And she says the thing that's been dead the longest are all the sheep. And then she thinks, I know it was Ogo's khalasar who killed the sheep, because no one in Drogo's khalasar would waste an arrow on a sheep when they know there's shepherds to be killed. And I wondered why they killed all the sheep in the first place. And I guess they don't care much for mutton, because it seems like a large, crop of food source sitting here.
What you don't know is that the Lhazareen have very carefully trained their sheep to be watchdogs.
Oh, okay. So they had to take
If they
them
try
all out
to-
first.
Exactly. They're the most important element of the...
Yeah, I thought he must have a sizable khalasar. If Drogo's is 45,000, and Jorah mentions that there are about 10,000 left after the battle and after most of his men flee. They have he has a pretty sizable khalasar. They might have wanted to keep a few of those around for food purposes. Maybe, make some sweaters out of their wool that they could barter with.
It'd be funny if all of the Dothraki warriors sat down and started sort of carding the wool to try and get it. And they're all knitting. We're not leaving here until I got a big old scarf. Come on.
I need an affinity scarf before heading to Westeros.
But actually, so it's funny you said that about Ogo's khalasar, because I wasn't sure how big it was, but this town, the 10,000... you think are mostly from Ogo's khalasar, not the town. You think the town was quite a bit smaller than this.
He doesn't say specifically.
Yeah.
What he says is most of Drogo's riders have fled, but there's still about 10,000 slaves. So,
Right.
We don't know what makes up which portion. Dany mentions that there are both the town people slaves and the Dothraki slaves, which we'll get into here shortly about the Dothraki slaves. But so I don't know what the breakdown is of Dothraki slaves versus Lhazareen slaves.
Right. And presumably Ogo's khalasar had some non-Dothraki or some Dothraki slaves of their own as well. So
I guess so.
Probably some of those get transferred across as well.
Yeah.
So we've been mentioning the Lhazareen. They're from Lhazar in the southwest which is southwest of Vaes Dothrak. It's towards the southern coast of Essos, not far from what's known as Slavers Bay, which is where Jorah was recommending the khalasar heads now to sell their new slaves to make the money for the ships.
Yeah. And Dany remembers that Khal Drogo told her that these Lhazareen belong south of the river and that the Dothraki Sea is not for sheep. Now, he's referring to the Skahazadhan River, and she didn't specify this, but what I took from that is possibly did he mean that this attack was because they had built a town north of the Skahazadhan and they were destroying it, saying, you don't belong here, this isn't your area, you belong south of the river.
That's a good question, actually, because I did wonder about the motivation for this attack. I mean, obviously you want to sort of like get slaves wherever you can and apparently kill sheep for fun, but it does seem sort of like gratuitous, but maybe you're right, maybe that's it, maybe it's a matter of territory. They crossed over because they saw all this rich grazing land that their sheep could make use of, and so because at no point does it describe the Lhazareen as nomadic. I mean, it feels like they set up an encampment, more than an encampment, a town here.
Yeah, they're kind of like farmers is how I
understood
it.
Yeah, they're not nomads. Which you got to wonder about this decision. I mean, that grass must look greener on the other side of the river, but
it's going to be redder pretty soon with your blood.
Exactly. If that's what happens to you, if you happen to get caught by the Dothraki, I mean, I might take them across the river, graze them, and bring them back every night.
Yeah, like
that
the sneak attack on the other side of the river. Yeah, I had that same thought. Setting up shop on the northern side of the river, unless there's been no warning. Like, this is the first time this has ever happened. Seems like maybe not a great idea.
Yeah. So, back to the issue of slavery. I wonder, a lot of Ogo's men escaped, but presumably some of Ogo's some of his warriors were captured. And I wondered if there's any room for them in Khal Drogo's khalasar. It seems to me that that's how a khalasar would grow.
Yes.
By subsuming other warriors. But that never gets a mention here either. It's all slaves or ran away, basically.
Yeah. I had the same thought. I thought it seemed like an odd tradition of enslaving your own people. If all members of defeated khalasars automatically end up as slaves of the new one? Does that mean that when Rhaego unites all the khalasars, the entire Dothraki nation will basically be slaves to him?
the economy of slavery just does not hold up.
No, it doesn't. At some point, you gotta become one people. I mean, they are one. That's the thing. They're one people. They have the same traditions, customs, values, beliefs. So why are you enslaving them? Okay, maybe you give certain members of that khalasar like lowly jobs until they prove themselves or something.
Right. Yeah.
But I'm not sure that enslaving them all is the way to go.
Yeah. And of course, I mean, you want to be careful which ones are the blood riders. Because
Right.
Khal Ogo's blood riders have got it in for you right now.
Yes, those maybe you want to kill or sell as slaves or something.
Maybe kill those guys, actually.
Yeah. And it's very different compared to Westeros, because in Westeros, usually when you defeat a group in battle, you get a pledge of fealty from them, and then they become part of your group.
Right. Yeah, it's not like Khal Drogo had a vastly different political outlook than Khal Ogo.
Right.
They ride around the Dothraki Sea killing people. That's what they do. Oh, I'm not doing that. I mean, I'd do it for Ogo, but...
Not for you.
Yeah. What do you think I am? Put me in slavery.
Yeah, and Dany's upset by all this, and she thinks of it as the price of war and the price to pay for the Iron Throne. But again, we've mentioned this before. This is what Westeros very well might look like if she takes all these Dothraki over to Westeros. She takes a khalasar 45,000 Dothraki warriors to Westeros. They're not going to defeat you in battle and then say, have your lord pledge fealty to us, and then everything's good again.
At some point, you need someone to be able to sell your slaves to. If you enslave everyone, well, that's just a lot of mouths to feed at this point,
Yeah.
So we skipped over it in the summary, but when Jorah and Dany are riding sort of through the scene of the aftermath, there's a slightly odd anecdote about Ser Jorah actually killing one of Drogo's men for teasing him about the fact he was wearing armour for the battle.
Yeah.
Which it seems a very Dothraki thing to do, and so I think the Dothraki would respect him for that, but he isn't Dothraki.
Right.
And it feels like you might be overstepping the mark. I mean, sure, you did save them from the poison wine.
Yeah.
You've earned some credit, but killing members of the khalasar seems like it might be a step too far.
Yeah.
Especially just before a battle where you need that guy.
Right. Yeah, exactly. That was before the battle, because they were making fun of him when he put his armor on, which likely you would do prior to a battle. So
you would think. Although, if Jorah was putting his armor on after the battle was over, I think they were right to tease him.
I agree. That must have been the reasoning there. Why are you putting it on now? I think the point of the scene was to show that Jorah is a good fighter, and he's not to be taken lightly. He's kind of a badass.
Yeah. I mean, if he just killed a shepherd, that would not be that impressive. Yeah. He could have killed one of Ogo's men to achieve the same goal, just FYI.
True, yeah. Would have served.
Although he might not have had the element of surprise there.
How do they tell each other apart? It's not like they wear sigils and stuff,
Interesting question.
They're fighting their own people. These are Dothraki. This is Dothraki on Dothraki violence here. Do khalasars wear different colored vests or something? Or
for a fact, Khal Frey would just switch sides whenever he felt like.
Right.
So when they're discussing what to do with these 10,000 slaves, Jorah's slave knowledge comes in handy. You remember Jorah was banished for selling slaves. It was a bit strange that he talked to Dany about that, though. That's the kind of thing I might probably talk to Khal Drogo about. Hey, we can go and get a good price for this in Meereen, because that's where the slave trade runs. Telling Dany while she's barfing at the scenes and getting visibly upset seems like a odd choice.
Yeah, and I thought about Ned. He was going to do worse than exile Jorah if he got a hold of him.
He's going to exile his head from his shoulders.
Yeah, for selling poachers to slavers. And I was thinking maybe Ned had the right of it. Maybe this Jorah's not as all that he's cracked up to be here. I mean, he's a knight. He took a vow to protect the innocent, but he seems completely unfazed by all this and lobbying for selling the surviving children to fund their journey to Westeros. He actually had a plan for it. It's not like he was just like, yeah, he'll probably sell the children. He's like, here's the plan. Because Meereen just had a plague, they need more prostitutes and young boys, so we can sell them there and really fund our journey.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing to remember is that if rumor is now, I'm getting confused now between TV show and books. So call me if I overstep the mark here. But don't we believe he's got a pardon for his efforts?
We believe he was offered a pardon, that was on the table. But being last chapter, the fact that he
prevented the assassination rather than encouraged.
I'm guessing
it might not be happening. Right.
Yeah.
I was thinking. I think in the TV show he's in possession of a pardon at this point.
Oh.
And so if he were, then his sort of like abandoning all scruples to get to the boat back to Westeros might be just sort of self-serving.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I in the book we have not heard anything about a pardon. We knew there was a lordship and a pardon for him, I guess, if he managed to kill Dany and the child, but that went out the window when he thwarted the wine poison attack.
They don't know about Ned yet, do they? They don't know about Ned's arrest.
No, not
because that's another thing that would bring him home.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Once he learns that Robert's dead and Ned is under arrest, he's like, well, that's pretty much everyone who hates my guts.
Right. I'm just gonna waltz on back to Bear Island now. I got that sword there waiting for me. But I also wondered. I was thinking about Jorah and how he reacted in this situation. I wondered how his father, Lord Commander Jeor Mormont, would have reacted. And I doubt that he'd think about the best slave deals that he could get.
But that being said, I mean, once you know something, you know it.
Yeah.
You know, even if you're not proud of it, you know it.
Right. Can't.
You know, I know the lyrics to some Spice Girls songs. I'm not proud of it, but if it comes on the radio, I can sing along. You know, I'm literally lying. I do not.
I'm trying to think of one right now, and I can't think of a Spice Girls song.
My son, because the Spice Girls are English, he constantly accuses me of liking them.
Has he gotten you a Spice Girl shirt for Christmas or anything?
Don't encourage it.
So Dany stops the rape that's going on, and that also leads to some bloodshed, as I believe 2 of the rapers end up dead in that fight. One from Jogo, and one gets an arrow through him, and the other, I think Jogo takes his head off or something. So more bloodshed, Dothraki on Dothraki bloodshed here, and this is within their own khalasar. So
khalasar, right? Yeah.
But Dany asks Doreah to tend to the rape victim because Doreah doesn't have a rider's look. She's not Dothraki, she's Lyseni, and she has blonde hair and fair skin, and she thinks that this girl might react more positively to someone who doesn't look like the people who were just raping her. So if you're wondering why she mentioned Doreah doesn't look like the rest, that's why. She's Lyseni.
Yeah.
And then the next thing that happens is they go and they meet with Khal Drogo. And the Blood Riders, Khal Drogo's Blood Riders, kind of factor into this part of the chapter. So real quick, we just wanted to go over who the Blood Riders are just to remind you. And Quotho is the most sadistic of the Blood Riders. He's cruel and he likes to hurt, and he's very rough with Doreah and Irri.
And Dany's most afraid of him, right?
Exactly, yes.
Yeah.
Kaholo, on the other hand, is the oldest Blood Rider, and remember, I think I gave this in background once upon a time. He saved Khal Drogo as a youth, and so he's been kind of a favorite of Khal Drogo for a long time, and he's the kindest of the Blood Riders to Dany. And then we've got Hago, who we don't know much about Hago, other than that he's a large man, and the one thing we do know is that he's the one that shattered Viserys' wrist before Khal Drogo dumped the pot of whatever metal.
Molten gold.
Yes. Was it gold? Was it molten gold? I think it was, yeah. Over his head. It was Hago who shattered his wrist. And then Ogo also features in this scene. I think it's Quotho tells him to cut Mirri Maz Duur's tongue out, and he holds the knife up to her throat. And Ogo is a member of Dany's Khas. So that's who all these folks are that feature in this section of the chapter.
Right. So Dany goes to Drogo with a growing retinue, entourage of freed female slaves. And she's closely followed by Margot, who's one of the people who she's taken the slaves from. Yep. And Margot goes and blurts Dothraki at Khal Drogo so quickly that Dany can't follow it. But Drogo listens carefully and then looks at her with a sort of quizzical look, like, "What have you been up to?" And she explains that she's taken them, as her own slaves, and that if the warriors want them as slaves, they should make them wives.
Right.
And Quotho
not a fan of that
makes he says, "Does the horse breed with sheep?" And that's when Dany replies, "Well, the dragon feeds on horse and sheep alike."
Yeah. And she says right there that at that moment, Quotho reminded her of Viserys. And Drogo thinks that Dany's fierce response back to Quotho is Rhaego, his unborn child being inside of her, is making her spicy and feisty. It could also possibly be that she's feeling more comfortable in her position as the Khaleesi of the khalasar. But I was also thinking that maybe because of the way he spoke to her, Quotho reminding her of Viserys caused her to lash out in anger that stirred from lingering bad feelings about being spoken to by Viserys like that.
I'll add a fourth idea. When you know you're doing something that nobody's going to approve of, it's often a good idea to sort of just really go for it. All guns blazing. Exactly. And she's very much in that boat right here. Yes, she's not going to be able to convince anyone, so she better start shouting at them.
Yeah. This is the part after she said that where she thought, "Uh-oh, did I just cross the line here?" But no, that's Khal Drogo. He's very impressed at her feistiness.
Yeah. I wonder if has she not shown much of that, do you think? I mean, I'm trying to think back. I mean, I feel like she was like that when Viserys was killed. She was stoic and didn't care.
She didn't cry. She didn't actively do anything, but she also didn't react negatively either. So yeah, that probably Khal Drogo noticed the stoicism in her.
And she ate a 7-pound horse's heart, which I have on good authority is not an easy thing to do.
Now that is some serious feistiness right there. She's definitely all in on this if she ate a horse heart. Yeah. And by ripping it with her hands and teeth, nonetheless. She didn't even get silverware. But then we meet Mirri Maz Duur here. Khal Drogo's injuries, they don't look, easy for me to say. That they don't look that bad.
I remember that time when that arrow went through my bicep. I laughed that off.
It was nothing. He's got a arrow through his bicep and a slash across his chest. In fact, his nipple is gone. She notices.
Ouch!
I know. But there are no healers around because all the healers are off tending to the hurt warriors, and so Mirri Maz Duur says, "I'll do it. I can heal you." And she's kind of a tough one to figure out because she's here in this Lhazareen village, but Dany notices that she's dressed in fine clothing, significantly finer than anybody else was wearing in the village. And we discover she's got maester training, she's learned from the Jogos Nai and Asai mages, and she also speaks Dothraki and the common tongue very well. So there's a lot going on here in this Mirri Maz Duur. What is she doing in this random Lhazareen village?
Yeah. But I mean, I think that's a common element in this story is, people turning up in surprising places. Look at the very last chapter we looked at. Maester Aemon,
right,
turns out to be Aemon Targaryen, who had the opportunity to be king of the realm.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And just shows up there. You might ask the same question: what's he doing here?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, she's supposed to be a priestess and a leader of the village, and she's got she from all of this travel and learning that she did, she's got skills at healing and midwifery and.
You'd think she would use that in a bigger location like Meereen or Astapor or something like that.
Yeah,
they're not too far away from where she is right now in Lhazar.
Yeah. The other thing is her volunteering. I mean, I can imagine that the slaves that Dany just freed, and I use air quotes around freed because she's not really freeing them. She's seems to be making them her own personal slaves.
Right. Yeah.
There doesn't seem to be any sense of letting them go.
Yeah.
But you would listen attentively when they were talking to each other about getting his wound stitched up, and if you had the skills, would you volunteer? Would you volunteer to help? I mean, these people have just killed everyone you knew and loved. I mean,
right? Yes, she's freeing them from the same person who put them in that position. Is the Khal and his khalasar that caused all the death and destruction in her village in the first place. So do you trust this person to then heal the Khal? There's one of two ways you could look at it. If you're an optimist, you would think, well, she wants to prove her worth and maybe elevate herself in the slave stock situation here. Maybe she can position herself a little bit better. If you're a pessimist, like all three of the Blood Rider are, you'd say, no way, this lady's got, she's up to no good here. We don't trust her.
Her own case that she makes for herself is that she says, we're all one people. Anyone who's her, deserves to be tended to,
right,
without exception. So she's, and she's obviously, sort of like religious, and it seems to be a religion of peace and love rather than a religion of fire and brimstone. So.
Yeah, how it sounds anyway. But Dany's rationale is that this old, homely, thick-bodied woman didn't look like a magi. So,
a magi being a witch or a wizard of some sort.
That's what Kaholo, Kotho says that she's a magi. And Dany had heard from one of her handmaidens about these magis, and they were terrifying. They come and they suck the soul out of people and stuff. And she was like, well, this lady doesn't look like a magi.
Not the way you portrayed it anyway.
Right. But also, she's the only one that thanks Dany. Dany kind of, as she's riding through the village, she's gathering women that are currently being raped and taking them as part of her posse. And none of them thank her except for Mirri Maz Duur. So, I was thinking it could be politeness, just general politeness. Maybe it's because she clearly has a leadership position in the village and, has more confidence to speak up to her. Or maybe it's because she doesn't really belong here because she doesn't seem to be like the rest of the people. So
yeah, interesting. So, but Jorah, because she can speak common tongue and she says that she's travelled with a maester, Jorah says, well, the maesters are the people who have the most learning and healing in Westeros, so that's pretty good credential for me. So the last part of the chapter, which we didn't go into in much detail, is basically her stitching up Khal Drogo, and he grits his teeth and goes through it all, and it sounds pretty painful, But everything she does seems to be what you'd expect a healer to do. I mean, given the equipment she had, she uses, she stitches him up. She puts hot wine into the cuts to disinfect them. And then she wraps him in a bandage with a poultice of some sort.
Yeah. The only thing that I found weird is that she said there will be a fever and that not to drink wine or milk of the poppy. Now, I know she didn't get that particular training from the Maester, because in Westeros they treat everything with wine and milk of the poppy. So she must have gotten that one from one of the other groups she learned from.
So having watched her in action, Dany's convinced that she's got skills, so she asks her to be the midwife for when Rhaego comes. But at the same time, Quovo reminds Mirri Maz Duur that if this doesn't work out, that she's going to meet a similar fate to Khal Drogo. So. Right. Yeah, I was struck by the fact she said there would be a fever. It feels like if she's done her job right, there won't be a fever.
Right.
She should have what she was doing was protecting him from infection. And that does make you wonder, well, if she is intentionally poisoning him, perhaps she's giving herself a few days extra to say, I said there would be a fever.
Yeah.
He'll get better.
Exactly. That's what... that struck me as odd too. None of the injuries have been lingering long enough that they would get infected if she wasn't keeping it clean going forward,
Right.
So, anyway.
Right, you got some background?
I got a little bit here. One of the groups of people that Mirri Maz Duur mentions learning her healing from was the Moon Singers of the Jagos Nai. Now, if you remember, I think we talked about the Jagos Nai just the previous Dany chapter.
We did, yeah.
They're nomadic people that live east of the Bone Mountains, and they're the ones that bind their heads at the top so that they have pointy heads, and they're also the ones that ride zorses, which seem like zebras, basically. I guess a cross between a zebra and a horse, maybe? I don't know.
Which would be a zebra, as far as I'm aware.
Exactly. Moonsingers are priestesses of the Jogos Nai. However, their religion has spread over Essos, as Moonsingers were among the escaped slaves that founded the city of Braavos, one of the free cities on the western side of Essos. Each band of Jogos Nai is led by a warrior chief called a Jat and a Moonsinger. A Jat commands in matters of war, raid, and battle. However, the Moonsinger commands over any other aspect in the band's life, including acting as priestesses, healers, and judges. And males can also be Moonsingers. However, this requires boys to dress and live as women.
Yeah, interesting. So, the maester that Mirri claims to have travelled with was called Marwyn. There was indeed an archmaester called Marwyn. He was known to have travelled for 8 years in Essos, and it's from his writings that most of our knowledge of Ashai is gleaned. Uh-huh. So that does back up her story.
It does.
That's background information that obviously Dany didn't have at her fingertips.
Right.
But...
the best they could do. The best they could do was Jorah saying, "What does this maester wear around his neck?"
And what would you recommend for bunions? Milk of the puppy? Okay. Right. You know your stuff.
Boiled wine?
So Drogo's blood risers all assume immediately that Mirri is a witch. She claims to have healing arts. And that got me thinking about why that connection exists. Because that connection exists, or used to exist anyway, here in our world.
Right.
That basically a woman who could heal was therefore a witch. And I read sort of just doing a little bit of research on that. I read a very interesting piece by Barbara Ehrenreich, who's a writer that I've read other things by, on the association between midwifery and healing generally and witchcraft. Often the ability to heal, particularly in obstetrics, was considered proof of witchcraft. That's all you had to do was just if someone could say, "Oh, she successfully helped me when I had a difficult birth," that was proof of your witchcraft, and you could be burned at the stake.
Wow.
Yeah.
That doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but okay.
No, yeah. But what was particularly, I think all this is known. Most people recognize that this kind of thing went on. But there was an interesting facet of her thesis, of Barbara Ehrenreich's thesis, was that one of the motivations for the witch hunts of the 14th and 17th centuries was the simultaneous elevation and codification of the nascent but expanding formal medical universities.
Okay.
They were on the rise in that same period. They were exclusively male.
Right.
And these healing women were in their turf, were in their territory.
Okay. I see
And
where
so
this is going.
not that they organized the witch hunts, but that they were very much part of the patriarchy, and they gave
Right.
tacit support to rooting out these women
Yeah.
and making sure that this didn't go on anymore. And so, basically, to a certain extent, I think this continues even today, because I know that in the United States, for instance, there's quite a strong divide between midwives and obstetric doctors.
Sure.
They don't seem to like each other,
Right. Yeah.
and it feels like it's a strange remnant of an earlier time. But anyway, I just thought it was interesting stuff.
That is interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing.
So, you're welcome. So, comparison with the television show, it was somewhat simplified. There's none of Ogo's khalasar. It's just the Drogo's khalasar laying waste to the Lhazareen.
Okay.
Dany does rescue Mirri Maz Duur and grabs a bunch of other women at the same time. In the book, she sort of saved one woman, then saved another woman, then saved another woman. It was kind of like a herd of them in one fell swoop.
Okay.
And nobody gets hurt in the process, so there's no bloodshed then at the point she's rescuing them. She goes to Khal Drogo, but Maego gets there first. He's already talking to Khal Drogo before she even gets there.
Oh, all right.
So, yeah. Drogo is not hurt at this point.
Oh.
There's a slight difference. Drogo is not hurt.
That's quite the difference.
Right, because she gets angry in the same way. He gets happy about that in the same way. He tells Maego to go find another lad, but instead Maego challenges Drogo.
Oh, that's a bad idea.
Exactly, it was a very bad idea. But he wounds Drogo. Obviously, Drogo wins the fight.
Yeah.
But Maego wounds Drogo on the chest, and that's the wound that Mirri Maz Duur has to cure.
Okay.
But what's funny about it is it was entirely self-inflicted, because basically Drogo decides to fight without any weapons in his hands.
All right.
Maego has his curved sword.
Yeah.
Drogo comes empty-handed. And at one point, Maego's sword is against his chest, and instead of doing what I would do, which is like back away very quickly,
yes.
He pushes himself onto it, flexing his pecs,
Ow. Why?
Ouch, exactly. Because he's Khal Drogo. He can do that kind of thing. Yeah. So the scene ends with Drogo accepting Mirri's help. Thankfully, we don't get to watch all the surgery. So I welcome that decision.
Yeah.
But otherwise, very similar.
Okay.
So, pedantry corner. I thought of one, but then I had to retract it. The one I thought of was when she's taking the arrow out of his arm, she takes the head of the arrow off and then pulls the shaft back out, which didn't seem right. But I then reread it, and the arrow had passed through, so that would make sense that you take the head of the arrow off and then pull the thing out. I thought it was just embedded.
Otherwise.
I thought it was embedded in there, and it seemed like that would be the worst possible scenario. But it had passed through, so yes, no pedantry there. You had one though.
I don't know if it's pedantry or not. Maybe I just don't fully understand Dothraki culture. But the braids and bells thing confuses me some. Now, so what happens is, after a Dothraki warrior has a first battle that they survive, they can start growing their hair in a braid, and they don't cut that hair until they lose in a battle, until they're defeated in a fight, basically. And every time they win a fight, they add bells to their hair. So, if you keep your braid if you win a battle and add bells when you do, it seems like most living male Dothraki would have braids and bells, because either you win your fight and add bells and keep the braid, or you lose and die. So I just don't see a lot of mercy or submission going on in a Dothraki fight. Just in this chapter alone, we've heard of three deaths within their own khalasar that were easily avoidable. They were just disputes, and it ended in death. So yeah, I don't know. It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me that
I'm with you. It feels like the oldest person in the khalasar would have the longest braid and the most bells,
right?
Because you've survived it all,
Yeah, exactly.
But maybe that is the way that they do take the warriors of the opposing Khal on board. They cut their hair, but they keep them on as warriors.
Yeah, could be. All we know is that he mentioned that a lot of Ogo's warriors fled, but they still have about 10,000 slaves. We don't know if any of the slaves are warriors. You would think they would have killed all the warriors because there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of submission or mercy in the Dothraki culture for warriors.
Yeah. News and notes. This is all you, because I've tried to read your notes here, and it's just gibberish to me. I have no idea what you're going to say.
As usual, my notes are gibberish. Yes, it's done in my own version of shorthand so that I could remember, which oftentimes what gets cut out of the episode is me reading it over going, what am I trying to say here? So, what I'm trying to say is that another interview with George Martin for the book Fire Cannot Kill a Dragon by James Hibbard. And this one, he talks about a scene that he criticizes because he didn't like the way they did it in the TV show versus how he did it in the book. We had discussed this before in the chapter where this came up, which was actually chapter 11, episode 12, Dany 2. You brought this up in comparison with the TV show. George Martin disagrees with our take on it, but the showrunners, David Benioff and David Weiss, I think his name is, they were on our side. So here's what his issue was. It was the consummation of the marriage scene after Dany and Khal Drogo got married.
Okay.
Remember, they went...
I don't remember the book and the thing being that different.
So here's what Martin says. Why did the wedding scene change from a consensual seduction scene that excited even a horse to a brutal rape scene of Emilia Clarke? We never discussed it. It made it worse, not better. And what he's referring to is that in the show, when the two characters have their consummation scene, Daenerys was forced into it with Khal Drogo, and she's left kind of visibly shaken about it afterward. However, both the showrunners and the actors felt like it just didn't jive. That just, like, there wasn't enough time to get in Dany's head to understand how she could go from being terrified of this man to, willfully, a 13 to 14-year-old girl willfully wanting to consummate this relationship with the significantly older Khal Drogo. So Right.
Okay.
We had mentioned that as well. We have mentioned that, where this, in the book, it kind of makes the scene seem very sweet and tender and special, but really is a 13-year-old girl being raped by a adult man. So
yes, exactly. Well, thank you for that. That's interesting.
Yeah.
I think George Martin should change his attitude to that.
Yeah.
I don't think it does him any favours
to
hear him say those things.
Yeah.
Anyway, let's conclude. So Dany, she's not really Dothraki. She's appalled by rape, slavery. She's trusting of captives. She's blind to the payoffs and needs of her warriors. Does she really have what it takes to be a Dothraki?
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, she's failing.
Does she have what it takes? Does she have what it takes to win Westeros? I mean,
right.
You win or you die.
Yeah.
There's no room for mercy there.
That's what... She's going to get more of this when she takes the khalasar to Westeros. So she better get used to it. You
saw where mercy got Ned Stark.
Right. Yeah, exactly. But Mormont compares Dany to her brother Rhaegar. And we're assuming it's Dany's kind-heartedness where, she took pity on the young girl who she mentions was about her same age. So, she probably very hard for her to watch that. But it kind of creates a complex picture of the dead prince that we continue to have pieced together for us.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about this earlier. He was beloved and kind and exceptional in battle, but a little bit rash, a bit impetuous,
right?
A little bit oblivious to the consequences of his actions.
Man, I tell you what, I've been married for 21 years. If I won a crown of roses and rode past Stacy and handed it to some other girl, I would have to have gotten knocked in the head pretty good to not know what the consequences of those actions were.
You would have to hope that the kingdom fell apart.
That's the only way.
It's the only thing that would save you. And previously, Mormont had described him as valiant, honourable, and noble. And I looked up some other things that people had said about him previously. Barristan Selmy described him as determined, deliberate, dutiful, single-minded. And then I was struck by that last one, that single-minded.
Right.
And,
yeah.
That could go to sort of like perhaps his downfall. He was like, woohoo, look at that girl. And get all single-minded on that.
Yep.
And,
he had blinders on as he rode toward her with the crown of roses. Yeah.
So the khalasar now has the wherewithal to get to Westeros. That's something that we had noted earlier. It was a bit of a challenge.
Yeah.
But
I guess the plan changed because Rhaego's title, what he's prophesized to be, is the stallion that mounts the world. Now, right as he's about to be born, they're about to ship him off to Westeros. And then later he's going to have to come back and be the stallion that mounts the world, because I'm pretty sure the Dothraki consider the world to be Essos, and if he's going to unite all of the khalasars, he's going to have to get back to Essos to do it.
Well, here's what Drogo's thinking. My infant son could take Westeros.
Right, that's what it is.
He'll cut his teeth in Westeros, and then he'll come back here, where the real men live.
Yes.
Where the hapless Lhazareen just sit around in the grass waiting for us to kill them.
Yeah, that must be his plan, because otherwise they've changed from the original plan of taking over Essos first and then tackling Westeros.
Yeah. Well, but I mean, I think we did say this last time that last time we had a Dany chapter, that the attempt on her life had changed Drogo's attitude. You know, he's gone, all right, let's do this.
Yeah, I guess you would think as he cooled down after the fact, he would be like, well, we gotta stay on task here. This is the prophesized call of Khal's. Got to let him do his thing first, and then he'll go get the Iron Throne back.
But the thing is, look at the pointers. I mean, they just happen to have stumbled across a trove of riches in the form of Lhazareen slaves that will pay for passage of all of them to Westeros.
Yeah.
The omens are good.
They're pointing.
Give me a sign, any sign.
They're pointing in the direction. They're pointing west, I guess.
Yes, clearly. So Drogo appears to get very good medical treatment, but did he? Woe unto Mirri if he's double-crossed them.
Yeah.
Quotho will not be forgiving.
Right.
I mean, Quotho's life depends on this, remember? I mean, he follows him,
Right.
All three of them. All three of them are tied together.
Yeah, you'd think with that fact, with that knowledge, they would have fought a little harder against this plan. I know that Khal has the ultimate say, and he said, it's got to get healed up, but they really seem to not trust Mirri Maz Duur.
Honestly, if I was Quotho, I would have spent at least a couple of years of my life as a blood rider learning basic field medicine.
That's a good... Yeah, that would be a good idea. That makes a lot of sense.
You're a very diligent blood rider. Oh, it's nothing, really. All right, let's draw a line under this.
All right.
As always, you can reach us at ghost.harrenhall and at gmail.com, and follow us on Twitter at ghostharrenhall. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube.
And if you please wouldn't mind going out and giving us a rate and or review wherever you can do so, we would greatly appreciate that. If you don't have time to leave us a review, we understand, but if you please just consider giving us 5 stars. That takes but a second. We would greatly appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks for listening.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye. Hey everyone, it's Mac. Simon's second toilet story ran a bit too long, so we had to move it until after the music. So if you're interested in hearing it, stick around till the music's done.
So the other toilet story is a plumbing mystery. I throw this one out there. This goes along with the flying iPad in terms of...
Luckily, my iPad did not fly into the toilet.
That's true. Nothing to stop it. Nothing can go wherever it wants.
Right.
So I go to the bathroom and I walk in and there's water on the floor. And I'm like, uh-oh, trouble. So I mop up the mess and I trace the leak. And the leak is coming from the screw that connects the cistern to the sit part of the toilet. It's dripping down that screw. So the water, I'm guessing it's coming from the cistern because it comes from the cistern down that screw and down to the floor.
Yeah.
So something's wrong. I stick a bucket under there. I turn the tap off.
Yep.
And I flush the toilet. So it flushes, empties the cistern. No more water there, but the bucket in case. And I leave it alone. And I say, don't use that toilet. Use the other toilet. So, we're done. I come back to it the next day. The bucket is full.
What?
Like, full. And it turns out that I thought I hadn't turned the tap the whole way. I'd left it. So the cistern had filled back up again and the leak had happened again.
Oh, man.
And I was
That's
like,
a pretty aggressive leak to fill a bucket in one day.
Exactly. I mean, the floor was really wet when I went in there, so I wasn't too surprised. So I was like, oh, man. So I throw the bucket of water down the toilet and I turn the tap the whole way and put the bucket back and flush the toilet again to re-empty the cistern. Next day, nothing. Bone dry.
Okay.
Absolutely bone dry. No problem at all. I'm like, oh, at least I turned the tap off properly this time. Quite the plumber, aren't I? Yeah. Exactly. And just out of curiosity, I lift the lid of the cistern and it's filled up. I failed again to turn that tap off.
What? Are you turning the right tap off? Maybe you've turned the
there's
tap
only
off
one.
To the sink.
There's only one. But now the cistern is filled up, but the bucket is bone dry.
Oh, a bucket that was full from
bucket which the last time I'd left it overnight had filled to the brim. This time, not a single drop of water in it.
Huh.
Now,
interesting.
Since then, I've not moved the bucket, believe me, but I've been slowly reopening the tap.
Yeah.
To allow it because it was going. When I realised that I hadn't closed it properly the second time either. When I flushed it, I listened and there was you could hear like a thin drizzle of water. So it was filling up. So then since then I've slowly been reopening the tap so that it gets, faster and faster, refilling the system. Still not a single drop of water in that bucket. It's like there was some huge leak that has gone away.
That has fixed itself. That's
just fixed itself.
That's what leaks do, I think. They just fix themselves.
In my experience, that is the first time. So wow. I have absolutely no idea. Now, I will say I have not got the tap back to full open yet. So maybe it's a sort of like a speed thing. Maybe it's when it's filling up at full speed, it does it so fast that the cutoff doesn't happen and it overspills or something.
I wouldn't think that's the case, but I don't know. I'm not a licensed plumber.
Yeah, exactly. But how do you explain this otherwise? I mean, this is just absolutely mysterious to me.
Yeah. Especially since when it was just slowly leaking before, or slowly, when the valve was just slightly open, it still filled the bucket.
Exactly. But then when it was slightly less open, it didn't let a single drop through. I have absolutely no idea. I mean, I was like, oh God, I got to call a plumber. Oh, no. But apparently all you have to do is just turn a tap off and wait a little while and everything will be fine. Hooray, me!
That's what they teach them in plumbing school and what plumbers don't tell us, apparently.
So yeah, I invite listeners to chip in on what that might be because I'm still hesitant about the bathroom. I mean, it's got a tile floor, so it's not going to, if the leak happens, it's not the end of the world. And the leak is from the cistern, not the toilet, so it's not quite as revolting.
Yep.
That is my toilet stories.
That is something. I don't know. I don't know what it is. But we are past the 10-minute mark. So.
Yeah, sorry. Oh, toilet humor.